Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, our sales skills. Robin and Andrew, y'all go ahead and come on screen. There we go. Here they come. Excellent. Hey, guys.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody.
Hey there. So if you are in chat, we have some folks that are still getting on. Go ahead and give us a shout out for where you are joining us from. While we have everybody getting on, we had a good crew that was registered for today, but we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, welcome to this webinar about insurance. I called it Let's Talk Insurance, and this is a little bit of a different format, Robin and Andrew, than we normally do. So I'm excited for this topic today, and I want to introduce, I'm Maggie Evans with Professional Development, but I wanted to introduce Robin Price and Andrew Matlock. Robin Price is the president of Allen Tate Insurance, and Andrew Matlock is the business analysis manager. That sounds like a pretty technical. Did you come up with that yourself, or Robin came up with that? It sounds pretty technical.
Actually, I came up with it prior to him joining us.
So what
we're delighted to have him.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is a business analysis manager in the insurance world?
Sure. It's a pretty creative title to take advantage of my experience in claims and on the carrier side, as well as underwriting, and just be involved in a lot of our aspects from sales and service in the agency. So really, I just fit in as part of the leadership team here, and provide ways to make us better in any capacity that I can assist with.
I love it.
He is fabulous.
I was going to say, I've loved working with you. Now, how long have you been in the insurance world, Andrew?
So my careers, I've been in the insurance industry for about 12 years, 11 and a half years on the carrier side, and then almost 9 months now with Allen Tate Insurance. So
it's gone by quickly.
It's been a great experience.
It's been fantastic. And then Robin, Robin's face is a familiar face to all of us. And Robin, how long have you been in the insurance world and then with Allen Tate Insurance?
Do I have to say how long I've been with it? My entire life, and I have been with Allen Tate for 19 years. I started out actually at Providence in 485 in the sales world and just kind of evolved to this. I came early on in 2003, and we started the insurance in 2001. So it was great starting out in the early years and just evolving, you know, as you guys continue to sell all those houses, and we try to find ways to add value to what you do every day to make your life easier.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, that's a good introduction. And I reached out to the two of you to come on with me and have a conversation about insurance. It's really easy for us to think about the day-to-day insurance. Homeowners insurance is what we think about. I'm working with a buyer. I need to make sure that they have the proper insurance. And it is also easy to miss some of the other opportunities. And that trusted advisor role that we have when working with buyers and sellers are really important. And I was reading some information recently about flood insurance specifically. And if we're not in an area that necessarily has a lot of issues with flooding on a regular basis, like some other parts of the country, which sometimes can make us a little less aware of how important it is. So I wanted to start the conversation today and spend most of our time learning more about flood insurance, what the zones are, what is it, you know, when a client should have flood insurance, and when they necessarily may not have to. And I know you've got some information on that. And then I also want to spend some time with some other insurance products that I know are important for us to make sure that we're paying attention to. But first, before we get into that, I do want to remind everybody that we do have the Q&A there. So if you have a specific question for Robin or Andrew, feel free to put it into the Q&A and we'll keep an eye out for that. You can also use the chat there to say hello to folks or to make a comment. That's absolutely okay too. So who is going to get us started on the flood insurance conversation? And I just want to be able to jump in and ask a question. If you will have a spot where I have a question. So I just wanted to put that out there in case I call your name.
Okay, I will start us off about flood insurance.
Okay.
And then Andrew will chime in from time to time, and we're happy to answer any questions as we go along. As Maggie mentioned, when we talk about flood insurance, we're so focused on making sure that they have their home in place, and we don't really think about flood insurance unless we really feel like it applies to us. But I will tell you guys, we are all in a flood zone. It's just whether or not that it's a preferred zone or a zone that by your mortgage company that you are going to be required to get that flood insurance. So what we really think of in insurance world, excuse me, guys, is a flood is generally, it's a temporary condition when 2 or more acres of normally dry land and 2 or more properties are inundated by water or mud flow. So when you think of flood and you relate it to homeowners insurance, a leaky pipe or a flood in your home is not what we consider flood insurance. So believe it or not, you just cannot ignore it. Flooding is the most costly and lethal natural disaster. $8+ billion in losses on average each and every year, and 90% of natural disasters that will involve flood. And 98% of the US population lives in a county that's experienced flood.
So even with all that, how many people are actually carrying flood insurance?
Less than 12% of homeowners carry flood insurance. In North Carolina alone, less than 5% of homeowners carry flood insurance. That's pretty staggering. And if you're uninsured and the economic losses from flood exceeded insured losses by $10 billion.
So hold on a
So even
second.
those
I want that to sink
Yeah.
in a little bit.
For sure.
Annual uninsured economic losses from flood exceed by $10 billion.
Yep.
Yep.
So
Wow.
for those that were actually carrying flood insurance versus those that were, it's a dramatic difference there.
Okay.
So FEMA, if you're a business owner and you have a loss and you suffer, and we saw this, I think we had a situation even in the Marshville area a few years ago where a business had a flood in that area, and they did not reopen. So 40% of businesses damaged by a national disaster sometimes never reopen.
So here's where our flood insurance comes in. So what is flood insurance when we're talking about it?
It basically protects you from flood of rising water that affects the 2 or more properties. So again, if you have a pipe burst, that's not really generally a flood. It's the rising water, and it is not covered by your home insurance policy.
And it's got to be purchased separately. So keep that in mind. You may have your homeowner's policy, but do you have a flood insurance policy?
And going back to that, if for some reason you decide you want to purchase flood insurance, you do have to apply for it. If you need it at the time of your mortgage and you have a mortgage and it is required, there is no waiting period. But if you say, I want to just purchase flood insurance, there's a 30-day waiting period.
So again, it's going to cover your property, right? It's going to cover the building, any of your personal property, your contents, your belongings. And there's that distinction there between water damage caused by a flood versus any other event. So you could have a pipe burst or a sewer backup into the home. That's not going to be flood. That's where you're going to look for your homeowner's policy. And then you've got 2 different types of areas where you can actually go purchase it. We obviously have carriers, private flood insurance carriers that you can go through to purchase it. Otherwise, if it can't be purchased there and they're not willing to write it, then you would be looking to go through the federal government, through the FEMA or the National Flood Program.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So, and maybe this is just me. Maybe this is just me, but often I think about being in a flood zone is there's a creek running behind the house. There's a river running nearby. But the reality is, we lived in New Orleans for a couple of years, and you know where the water came from? From the bottom up. And so
Yeah.
I think that's where we can get in trouble sometimes if we think about only a creek nearby that floods, which we do have that around here, or at least in the Charlotte, most areas do. But there also can be situations, and I think that's where we can get caught, are the unknowns of the rising waters. Can you talk a little bit more about that if you don't already have that in your discussion for today?
Yeah, so that's where you're gonna wanna start looking at the flood zones and looking at the
Mhm.
maps and the government resources of where exactly those are coming from. Identifying those ahead of time.
So really,
Okay.
anytime you have a question and you're curious about that and you need to know about the mapping, that's when you contact your Allen Tate Insurance Trusted Advisor, and we'll pull those zones. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they look like, a little bit about the cost of it. So you guys will know, but you would, if you're showing property, you wouldn't want to pull that determination on every property. But if there's a
Mhm.
question, maybe there is a creek, or maybe in some counties, they come in and they change the maps. And you didn't have flood insurance before, but now you're required. Some of you may or may not know that it is the only policy that we can transfer from the owner to the new owner, the
That's right.
seller to the new owner. So that's another way to take advantage of making sure you have the coverage.
So again, some of the biggest things that we hear from even existing clients is, we're in the middle of hurricane season right now. So, carriers are going to start restricting their binding insurance. We get notices all the time about upcoming storms, and you can't certainly buy flood insurance just because you're afraid something's coming up. So, certainly having those discussions with your insurance rep and understanding, getting those ahead of time to be prepared. And the Carolinas, even inland, we experience the flood. So you don't have to just be a coastal property that's going to be experiencing that.
And we're in peak, it's considered right now, peak hurricane season.
I want to pause
So now
again.
yeah,
I don't mean to keep pausing you, but I like to pause.
No,
on
I like
something
it.
big.
great.
This is a big one for agents that we can forget about. We're under contract with a buyer,
Yeah,
and we hear there's a hurricane that's a brewing.
right.
We need our ears, our reticular activating system. You know how, you may not know, I love talking about the reticular activating system, but everybody that's on this call now, when you hear that there is a hurricane that's a brewing and you have somebody under contract, you need to contact your insurance partner ASAP.
That's right.
Absolutely. And with your homeowner's insurance, if we've already bound the coverage, you have no issue. You're going to get across the finish line. The sooner the better we do that, because once that wind starts blowing, it's an entirely different story. And we would hate for your closing to get delayed, and then everyone would be upset.
So now let's talk about what it actually costs to purchase flood insurance and what goes into those pieces.
So there's a new pricing that they have come out with, and it's really rating variables, and it'll talk about how far it is to the water source, how it's occupied, the construction type, even the ground elevation. They look at the first floor elevation. So it's really a broader range of flood frequencies, and all this makes a difference in the pricing.
So there's a lot of data that comes from FEMA, but then there's obviously other data that some of the private insurance carriers, and then that factor of the cost to rebuild. Like we talk about replacement cost value. I know one of our questions that came through, the difference between the contract price of a home and what it actually costs to replace it. So a lot of our conversations with the realtors and the clients say, I paid XYZ for the amount of my home, but the insurance company is going to look at what does that cost to rebuild, and it could be more, it could be less. So we don't necessarily get caught up in the market value or that purchase price of that, but obviously that factors in with these other variables, just like any other type of insurance. When the underwriter is going to look at how much they're going to charge for it. So
and we're really seeing that, and you guys are aware of this: the cost of building materials, the labor shortage, getting someone to work, all of those things make or a major factor
Sure.
in what it's going to cost to rebuild. And generally, I had one realtor yesterday, something came back 200,000 or 300,000 more than the purchase price. And they immediately think, well, if I could sell it for that,
Sure.
I'm ready to sell it today. But again, they're saying that we're going to ensure and make sure that we can rebuild the house. So carriers want to make sure they get 100% of the insurance to the
Mhm.
value. So we're seeing some variables, and when your policies are renewing, we're seeing anywhere from 8 to 16% increases on just the dwelling alone going up because of cost to rebuild has gone up.
And historically, the carriers have always had an inflation guard in place so that the home's value, the construction costs of that rebuild are in line, but it's almost it's a moving goalpost sometimes for us working with these carriers, trying to make sure that they're keeping up with good information, accurate information on what today's market costs are for construction. So here's where we're looking at the flood insurance, just some average costs that you can kind of look at depending on the flood zone you're in.
An average cost, if you're in an X, and that means you are in that preferred zone,
Moderate risk.
it's about $800 a year. If you're in an AE, it could be average is about $1,800 a year.
Yep.
Can I say something real quick? So here's something that
course.
we use language incorrectly a lot as agents. I hear it quite a bit, and that is the house in a flood zone? And
Mhm.
I know Robin Price, I've heard you say this over and over again. Every house is in a flood zone. What's the
Yes.
risk? And Iris put a great question that relates to
Yeah.
this.
Excellent.
Yeah, so
so-
we can look at the flood zone determination report to show you exactly what that might look like on the next slide.
Yeah, if
Okay,
you will
good.
send us your address to Iris, we can map it
Sure.
and see if it even shows. I will tell you that some people that live nearby a creek decide, maybe I should purchase it.
Mhm.
And you don't, the dwelling limit on the standard flood is up to 250,000 and 100 on the contents. You may go, I only want to purchase 100,000.
Mhm.
So there are options, and would be happy to work with you. Great question.
Yeah, so here, Iris, you'll see, let me close out of that Q&A. Here you go. So this is what is a flood zone determination report. So with this particular location here, you're going to look at the standard flood. So again, this is the report we look at for insurance requirement, not necessarily the pricing, but it shows how close the address is to a high risk zone. So when we're looking at this particular address, it's going to pull up the homes information versus the nearest flood zone. So going back to your question, Iris, on if you've looked at the FEMA map and it looks like it's not in a flood zone, there should be some relative comparative information that you can see how far away you are. And then you can absolutely purchase it, to take advantage of if that changes.
And when we're pulling these determinations, it is the same report that if you need to get a mortgage or your client needs to get a mortgage, it's the same report. It's company paid. If you're working with a buyer and you question, maybe it's changed or maybe I'm concerned, we're happy to pull this determination.
And this is,
and I know there's some new, probably some that I haven't heard us talk since Iris is on here from Asheville. We're excited to work with you guys. We also pull a clue report, which will also tell the losses. So, if there's been a water loss, we're going to know about it. If there's been a claim that's been reported concerning flood, then that report, the loss history goes back 5 years, and we'll be able to determine that for you guys.
now this flood zone determination report is coming from a more, this is coming from a source that's going to be have a lot more detail and more up to date than when we just look at the overlay map on our MLSs. A lot of our
Yes.
MLSs have a
Yes.
flood zone
Correct.
overlay. So if there is a concern, then you definitely want to have insurance take a look at that flood zone determination. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. We're
Okay.
happy to do it.
Okay.
So even when we're talking about the flood zones, these are your standard flood zones. So again, the AE that we were looking at, that higher, more expensive, obviously, because it's a higher risk. Having that, and basically the metric of that is having a 1% chance annually of flooding. So again, if it starts with A or E, you're going to be in that flood zone. The X, which was obviously that cheaper one, is a less chance for flooding, obviously a 0.2%. And it falls into that. And even X falls into that low risk. So Iris, going back, that you may be in an X area or a C, but that never, it's Mother Nature. So it does not mean it won't flood.
Right. And if you've got a creek behind your home and you see that it rises a lot and you're a little bit concerned about it, again, it could be less than $800.
Sure.
But
Can
we're
I ask a
happy
question?
to price it out.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so if you have a creek that runs behind your house and it rises and it causes the ground to shift, right? So maybe the house
Mhm.
doesn't flood, but the flooding causes the ground to shift, which causes damage with your home. Is that something, what covers that damage?
I mean, that's when you typically get into an earth movement type situation.
Okay.
And, there is going to be some coverage issues with that. A lot of the carriers, there is mudslides and things like that. I mean, we'd have to look at those as a case by case basis, but there's distinct definitions of that flood. I would not traditionally expect that to be something that falls, especially if it's, something that's occurred over time.
Okay,
Like mudslides, could be some exclusions there.
Sure.
Okay.
That's a great
That's a
question.
very good
I
question.
thought that might go along with Iris. So if you have a creek, but your house sits way up, it's not
Yeah.
likely that it's gonna, be Noah's Ark. But if
That's
there's a
right.
concern, okay,
That's right.
It's just really individually and personally how much you want to pay, how much you want to self-insure. But you saw the stats that it does happen.
Mhm.
So even getting into that distinction now, we talk about the flood zones and then there's the preferred risk. So again, going back to Iris's question, you don't have to live in a flood zone to purchase it.
No.
And this is going to be that program that you would be looking at where it's not necessarily a designated flood zone. And, the affordability is the key there, because obviously if the risk is low, then
Yeah,
the premium should
right.
reflect that. So that would be something we would want to look at for you. And this is the criteria just to qualify for the program. You've got to own the home or an owner or tenant of a single family. And then the apartment's not a basement. So all these details here, certainly would be part of our discussion with you. The property is located in a low to moderate flood zone, that X and C that we talked about. And again, this is all designated by FEMA. And then they also look back at rating features here. Has there been experience of 2 or more flood claims? And so, in that particular situation that we're talking about, the expectation that there has been would probably not be there. So.
And then if you want to really look at some resources, you can go to FEMA.gov and look at that and look at maps and floodplain management and flood insurance. But if I had questions about flood and flood insurance, I would pick up the phone and give your trusted advisor a call, and we're happy to help you with it.
And we didn't get into the elevation certificates and things of that nature, but our biggest point here is if the word flood comes up,
Call us.
we're a resource to do the flood zone determination, quotes, guidance. If your buyer's looking at a home and the elevation certificate, I mean, a lot of this stuff from a private insurance carrier standpoint is what they already are utilizing that we can get our hands on for you to at least help answer the questions and get some peace of mind, certainly.
And a lot of people will purchase it for a peace of mind.
Right.
So let's talk about process for a minute, because I think this is a good spot to talk about process. I'm an agent. I have a buyer that's looking at a property. We're concerned that it could potentially either we know it's in a flood zone or it's close. Reach out to my insurance partner. They're going to do a flood zone determination. And then from there, let's say that, yes, it is in a flood zone. The next step is to order that. What happens next? Let me ask that.
We'll be able to determine if it comes back in an AE zone with our new, the way they've changed the rating now. We may or may not need the elevation certificate.
Mhm.
We're seeing now that we don't need the number that we had to have before with the new rating. So the minute it happens, and we'll start working on the insurance so you guys can take care of your buyers and get across that finish line.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we've got vendors in place. Selective Flood is a company
That's-
we use that will provide us with resources on, we can pull the elevation certificate. Some of that actual detailed information may take a couple days, but we can certainly get our hands on it for you.
Yeah.
So
Rarely, and every once in a while, we'll find, somebody will go, I want to map a lot. Sometimes it's a manual mapping. It may take 2 to 3 days to get it back, but we know rather quickly, if not immediately.
Okay, and then the elevation certificate is that something that always has to be ordered for any time there's going to need to be flood insurance if it's in a flood zone, or could there be one on file that can be reused?
There could be one on file that can be reused, and with the new mapping, we're not seeing that we need it every single time.
Just to
Okay.
get the quote.
Right.
Correct.
So
Okay.
they've made it much easier.
Okay, and then if flood insurance is required, is that something, now this is probably not a question for you all, but this is something to consider, and that is, would a seller be willing to pay a year of flood insurance to help a buyer get into the home? That's something that certainly could be looked at, that they could offer either from the seller side, if you know that they have a home that's in a flood zone, or if it's a buyer that's going to be purchasing a home with a flood zone. Okay, great.
Right. And one thing about flood insurance, it is the only policy that can be transferred to the new buyer. So that's an option as well.
Mhm.
So if I'm putting on my listing agent hat and I am going on a listing appointment and I look at the map and I see it's in a flood zone, I want to make sure that I'm asking that seller, are you currently covering your house with flood insurance? Is it required or not? And if you do, then they would need to get in touch with their insurance carrier. Is that what would happen? Or
Mhm.
how would that work?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they could contact their insurance carrier and they'll set it all up to transfer over to the new buyer.
That's right.
Okay, perfect. What's next?
Well, that's actually it.
Okay.
We had our other topics that we could talk about on the condos. We've got a great condo
Go ahead and
presentation.
stop sharing your
Okay.
screen for a second.
Of course. All right,
Yeah,
so you can see us all.
perfect. Yeah, there were some questions that I wanted to ask, and really, let me just pause for a second to say, if I'm a buyer's agent and I'm working with a buyer, whatever the property type is, pause and ask what type of insurance do they need, and that could be somebody that's buying a condo. They're not going to be covered by typical homeowners insurance, right? And I know that you have
Correct.
a presentation. We can do that as a whole different topic. I like that.
Absolutely.
That's good. But can you give the short and dirty on that of?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So North Carolina actually has a North Carolina Condominium Act. It's a statute from 1986 that mandates the condominiums or townhomes built after 1986, and whether the master policy of the association is responsible versus what the unit owner. In a nutshell, what we basically look at is asking for the declarations and the bylaws of these HOAs, and then we'll look at it as who is going to be responsible for breaking up that pizza, whether it's the unit owner has got to be responsible for a little bit of dwelling coverage versus the HOA. But a lot of times the misconception is walls in coverage, which does not mandate who's supposed to be covering what. It's based on those bylaws. So, if you've got a condominium that your buyer's looking at, or a townhome, and you can get your hands on those bylaws, I enjoy reading those and getting into the details of the statutes and making sure that our team knows how to interpret those and give good information, because a lot of times you've got buyers who are going to be either paying for too much insurance, not enough, and they don't realize that they've got dual insurance, whether it's their unit owner policy or they're also an insured under the HOA, being a member of that.
It's wonderful having an ex-claims manager
Yeah.
to dissect all this. And we're finding out when we're looking at it, Andrew looked at one for one of our clients, and you went back. That's a great example to
Yeah.
share, that he went back and forth with with the client and with their association, and they were not understanding what they really needed to insure and how, and
Yeah, they're paying for too much
yeah,
paying for too much insurance
It
on
was-
our policy and didn't realize what they had with the HOA.
Yeah.
So condos are another tricky, but it's spelled out in the bylaws and the statute, both for North Carolina and South Carolina for those folks that are here with us from South Carolina, because those get a little dicey as well.
Good. Yeah, I've lived in a condo for 20 years and I sold them when I first got started in the business 17 years ago. And it was usually the case, either people were underinsured or way overinsured. And
Correct.
so I always like to bring that up. Another topic is if I'm working with an investor, maybe that's a new investor and they're
Mhm.
getting started in that whole process, asking the question if they understand how they should be insured with investment properties when they have multiple properties, and then guiding them on that. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure, and it really depends on if it's an LLC, if they've got multiple properties, whether they need to be looking at a commercial policy or just a dwelling fire for those individual policies. But the biggest thing is understanding the occupancy, the type of occupancy, whether it's a short term, and we've got carriers for the Airbnbs as well as our long term tenants, but making sure that they understand vacancy is a big issue. That's going to mandate what type of policy they have, because that's going to trigger whether the theft and vandalism coverages actually apply after 60 days
right.
in North
Right.
Carolina. So if you've got a policy if you got a property that's sitting there empty, if it burns to the ground, there's should be coverage. But if it's broken into and there's a vandalism type situation, then you need to make sure you're looking at whether your policy is written as a vacant policy or you've got it on a correct dwelling fire policy as a rental.
And we also have a program through one of our carriers. Most vacant homeowner policies are written on 3 months, 6 months, or
Mhm.
12 months. And if you sell it day 2, you pay the entire premium. We have a program through Central that's prorated just for us. And I think there's a $75 fee. So, you'd hate to purchase insurance for a year and have to pay the entire premium.
And we've even had scenarios where, past buyers come to us to purchase their next home, moving from Raleigh
Yeah.
to Charlotte.
Sure.
And, the Raleigh home's going to sit there, if there's little transitional periods of a few months being out, but, it's certainly for our investment clients who are looking at things, if you can advise us on the particulars of what exactly you're looking at, then we can, develop a la carte type of coverage that makes sure, they feel good about what they've got.
Could be vacant or it could be they're not living in it, vacant and unoccupied, 2 different scenarios.
Absolutely.
And then we'll underwrite it and make sure that they've got the coverage they need.
The really important thing that you said there is that with Allen Tate Insurance, that there is the special relationship with Central where you're not having to pay out the whole time if you're not going to need it for the whole time, which is great
Right.
for our clients to know about. I have one last topic, and that is, and this was not something I'd asked you about. So with umbrella policies, as realtors, we have to carry umbrella policies because of liability. But when we're talking to, or if we have a client that asks about umbrella policies, can you explain briefly what an umbrella policy is and an example of where it would really help a homeowner?
Absolutely. So when you're looking at your home, you've got, your personal liability. So it's going to protect you for any bodily injury or property damage that a third party comes to you and says you're legally liable for. And you may have $100,000 in that coverage or 500, but that umbrella is going to give you another million, 2 million, 5, or even 10, depending on your exposure and it's very inexpensive. It's a pure liability policy. So it just protects you personally for those, situations. If you're standing in line at Starbucks and ordering coffee and you tip it over and spill it on somebody, they can sue you. We're in a very litigious society. So, just looking at that extra affordability of that umbrella policy, goes a long way. And homeowners policies are written with a cap on these liability coverages. So, that umbrella is another product. And then obviously goes over and
the
above.
car.
Yep, absolutely. On the auto as well. So you being behind the wheel, under your auto insurance, that's where that umbrella, kicks in and gives you that additional coverage for a great value. It's very, very affordable. for what that provides.
I've always called it my peace of mind coverage.
Yeah,
You know, as Andrew said, you know, everybody wants to sue everybody. One example that I always talk about in Winter's Edge, we had a client that every year when the policy renewed, we offered an umbrella policy. And the next call was from an attorney looking for the umbrella policy. You know, they had hit a pedestrian and the limits were exhausted quickly.
right.
And they bought an umbrella policy that day. And of
Sure.
course, it didn't cover that loss. So,
Mm.
you know, if you don't have it, I strongly suggest you guys purchase one.
Yeah, and I had a client before who hit a golf ball and hit somebody, and it was a TBI, so a traumatic brain injury, and they'd come after asking for that umbrella because they knew that whatever you're carrying at 500,000 was not going to be enough for the injuries that they were found to be legally liable for. So
Wow.
you know, the auto behind the wheel, that's your liability. The umbrella covers it, and then kind of other than being behind the wheel of an automobile, you know, that's where you're going to want to look to your homeowner's liability with that umbrella on top of
Right.
that.
Okay. All right, good. Is there anything else to the two of you professionals that you see on a regular basis that that agents need to make sure that, sorry, I have a fire truck going by. But is there anything that comes up on a regular basis, either where you hear from clients and you wish that you had known about it, that somebody asked the right question, or anything else that you want to make sure that our agents know?
Well, I think on occasion, you know, when we're working with your buyers, we find out that they just don't know what they have. You know,
Right.
there's not anything specific, but, you know, we try to educate everyone and give them options. And the worst thing that can happen to us is when they do have that loss and well, I would have purchased that if you told me about it.
Sure.
So when they're buying those homes, it's always great, you know, to advise them, you know, whether it's us, whether it's somebody else, get that insurance checkup. So
Mhm.
you know, before that loss happened, what you have. And it's great to do a review when they're buying those new homes.
Especially in this market. I mean, it's
Sure.
such a tough market. You know, in insurance, the term is either it's a soft market or a hard market, just like in finance, it's either a bull
Yeah.
or a bear. We're in a very hard market right now where carriers are tightening up what they're willing to write and insure, and then also the adequacy of what they're covering and setting these limits at. So, you know, the carriers and the companies are not being aggressive right now on price. They're sticking in their heels. So for those, every one of us, you know, wants to, you know, get our insurance at a low rate. We never want to overpay, but it's not a price market right now. And you know, when you cut corners, a lot of times it depends on that company you're with.
Sure.
I think from our standpoint, our relationships that we have, we know, we were just talking to our marketing rep in here about the claim service and what our expectations are to take care of the clients and ensure that we are standing behind the word of the companies that we recommend they go through in that event of loss. Because insurance means nothing until you need it.
Absolutely.
So when it's a bad experience for all, it's disheartening. But you know, we certainly are advocacies for fighting to make sure that the claims are handled the way that we expect them to be handled when we place that business.
Yeah, we were talking, you know, just like with you guys, not all realtors are created equally. We said the other day, not all insurance agents are created equally.
Absolutely.
So there
Yeah.
is totally a difference. You know, not always the cheapest is always the best. It may be the option you want to go with, but you need to know what you're buying and why you're buying it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, let's do some wrap up here. And one thing I want to make sure, Ashley, if you had a question, can you go ahead and put it in the Q&A real quick, and we'll make sure to answer your question. And so let's do some wrap up real quick for anybody that's new, that doesn't know a ton about Allen Tate Insurance. Allen Tate Insurance is an insurance broker. So you all have a lot of carriers that are in different, I call it different price points, but not price points, but they cover different types. So a lot of residential, but then there's also carriers for higher end properties. Is that correct? Like more
Absolutely.
expensive
Sure.
All this-
properties that
yep.
need, what's the word that you use for it? What's the technical term?
Technical term, high valued,
High value. There you go. High value properties. And so that's like your Chubb. And then you have, so you all you have a lot that you can carry, that you work with. And then also you can cover even down to the beach. Is that correct?
sure.
Yeah, so all the demographics that we talked about, you know, location, whatever zip codes they are. I mean, different companies want different types of.
They all have
properties.
their
Their
niche,
niches,
just like
absolutely.
Central has the program for the vacants for us, and that they came up for Allen Tate.
Absolutely. So again, we call that one-stop shop with choices. So when your client goes and they're going to talk to Allen Tate Insurance, then they are getting, the insurance partner's going to look at all the different carriers to make sure that there's the right fit, and then coverage in North and South Carolina, from the mountains to the coast. So that's fantastic. And then if they, one of the services that I love that you all provide is the Clue Report. You mentioned that earlier. If you don't know what it is, it's allowing to find out if there's any previous claims for a particular property. And the way that that would be is if you're working with a buyer, you're making an offer and you have some concern that there might have been a past insurance claim or issue, roof, or there's been a fire or something like that, you can request what's called a Clue Report for that property. What's the best way for them to request that Clue Report?
They can email their insurance agent and they'll get it back to them immediately. Same day, if not within minutes, you will hear from somebody on the flood determination or the Clue Report, comprehensive loss underwriting exchange, the past 5 years of history if they've turned in a claim.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned the other one that I was going to talk about, which was that flood determination. So two services that are there. Fantastic. I know market conditions are tough right now. And so I want to have you guys back to have that conversation and we can talk more about condos. Anything else you want to say as we finish up today?
We just look forward to working with you all. Again, use us. We're a resource. We're part of your team, our team. They work when you work. On the weekend, if you need that flood determination, they'll pull it for you. Someone on the team is available for that, or the Clue Report. I will tell you, the Clue Report, for those of you that have not used it, take advantage of it. It's a company paid resource. If you're showing property and you question, and I tell this story all the time, if there's been a water loss or a roof replaced and maybe the client did not repair the roof, gives you a great bargaining chip to go back and say, hey, my potential buyer wants a new roof. So we're here to work for you guys.
That's right.
The trust starts with you guys. Put us to the test. We're happy to help.
Wonderful. Well, thanks both to you, to Robin and
Thank you
Andrew.
all.
Appreciate you being on with us. And I look forward to having you back. So have a great afternoon. Thanks everybody for
you.
joining us. And we'll see you next time. Bye guys.
Thanks. Bye.